Thank you very much, Anne-Sophie, and great to meet you all this morning. My name is, as said, Christian Gabe. I'm Managing Director in BCG Platinum, and I have a background as a computer scientist, been working as a consultant most of my professional career, has also served as a CIO for a company, and as a consultant, I typically work around topics on digitalization, IT functions, how they can be set up in a digital era, and also what to do on the whole tech side of the architecture, so you can enable everything you would like to do on the digital side. Just before I dive in, or we dive in, I would like to just encourage everybody to put up questions as we go. It's quite tiresome to listen to a consultant for 45 minutes or even more. So please join with questions or comments. You are free to either voice it or put it in the chat, because then we can make it a bit more relevant towards your questions and reflections based on what we go through. So why don't we just dive in? Just to give you a bit of a glimpse of how we are set up in BCG. Most of you probably know the BCG that was formed many decades ago, which have been doing very strategic work around strategy for companies and organizations, and also helping transformations go through. Over the last 10 to 15 years, we've been building out the whole digital side that you see on the right-hand side here. So those are entities in our company that both can support on the IT side, on the analytics side, and also if our client wants to build a digital venture, we have a team that can basically support the client all the way from the drawing board to getting it up and running and having traction in the market. And nowadays, roughly a third of our consultants are sitting on the right-hand side. So it's been a quite massive scale up. We have now like 5,000 consultants on the digital side, roughly 10,000 people sitting on the more classic side. And the idea is, of course, we want to be doing relevant consulting in a digital era. So we need to bring together the good old disciplines around strategy together with all the elements around digital and tech. So enough on how we organize. Let's try and dive in and talk a bit about the backdrop for Bionic. First and foremost, I'm sure everybody here has heard a lot of views on the value you can realize if you can fully tap into digital. And people both talk about top line growth, speed to market, doing margin uplift, reduce the costs, and innovate the business model, all of which are levers that can unlock a ton of value. And I think it's quite accepted by everybody that there's a big potential out there that could be harvested. If we look at what we see around us, we have seen this journey that we tried to lay out here. So going back 5, 6, 7 years, people started to try out some digital ideas. And we had a phase that we here called digital exploration, where different use cases are tried out in different parts of the organization. And if we should be a bit sober, we honestly think that very few companies have managed to both find the right use cases, do the value proof, and then the real hard part is subsequently scaling it. So really getting a significant outcome of those digital initiatives. And we actually believe we are at an inflection point, meaning that we think quite a lot of people will probably stay a bit on the path that most people are on today, which is the red line you see where you are doing more of the same, but you're really not getting the huge benefit and the scaling effect that could be achieved. And then we see some people who are addressing it more proactive and are getting the digital transformation right. And they get on the high curve going where they go through the scaling for value and really morphing into what we call digital as a new norm. So it becomes kind of part of the DNA of the company to embrace and utilize the digital potential and get to the huge value unlock. Maybe just a question, if you could just write on the chat. I mean, does this make sense? Does this resonate with your picture of the world? And Marie says it does. Definitely, yes. All right, so it seems that we are pretty much on the same page here. Then obviously a good question is what to do about this situation. And if we try and just dive ahead, I mean, looking at some of the reasons that we typically see that are hindering the big value unlock. First topic is that we often see that the organizations are trying a lot of things out. It's happening in various departments, but you could say it's probably spread too thinly, and there's not enough momentum behind it for any of those initiatives to really step up and scale. We also see that there is a big ability from the tech industry to say, if you buy this technology, everything will be grand, which is, of course, a nice thing to believe. But honestly, that's not the way the world works. You can't just buy a piece of technology and then you digitize your organization. So there also a lot of additional stuff needs to happen. Also, we see that people go at one business unit at a time, even though there's a lot of commonality across, and actually a lot of the potential around digital cannot be achieved just in one area. You actually need to look more holistically, so that also leaves value on the table. We also see examples of people who are more defensive and saying, let's just wait and see. And then largely, we have examples of organizations that are actually quite agile in nature, but then are very limited due to the whole technology side, because that was built in an absolutely not digital era, maybe even before the mobile phone was invented, and doesn't enable all the digital initiatives. So there's like a host of reasons why it's not easy just to go out there and achieve the big potential. We have done some research on this, and when we look at the organizations that have been doing a digital transformation, so this is not all organizations, but only those that have actually executed a digital transformation, what we see is that only around 35% of them have been successful. Yeah. So there's a lot of organizations that have been going through, but not really succeeded. And if we should then look at what are the key factors that the ones that get it right, they get right, so to say, then they have number one being having a holistic strategy with a very clear articulation on the business goals. And that is like being super tangible on the why, the what, the how, and what is the business value. So very, very clear. Number two is then actually monitoring how we actually doing. Are we actually progressing towards these targets? And do we have a very clear view of the state of affairs? CEO leadership is, of course, a classic one. I think the more subtle element is to also get the buy-in from the middle management, which is super tough because the middle management needs to run the day-to-day business. So how can they balance both doing that and doing new things? Very challenging indeed. And then also we see, if you are able to apply the agile mindset in the leadership and apply a fail fast and learn approach, you have a much higher chance of likelihood of succeeding. This is super hard actually, because most larger organizations, they have really codified the way they work. So this idea of just doing fail fast is not very intuitive. And then we also see that there's a great need for new talent that the organization typically doesn't have. So you need to bring that in order to be successful. And if you don't do that, you really set yourself up to pretty much fail. And then the last element that we have touched upon is the whole tech side. So typically the tech side is not really enabling the digital use cases you want to enable, because it's not flexible, it's not modular, you don't have the data you need. So really hard to actually put together a digital solution around it. Let's look a bit at what we mean when we talk about bionic. So bionic literally just means it's a combination of human and technology. It's not exactly as in Sophie's story with the dog, which was a robot inside, but it's really just good old human people, people that work very much hand in hand with technology. And then you could say that sounds super banal, right? But I think what our view is that if we look at the way we are today working with IT and tech in organizations, we are not really leveraging tech as much as it could. And even if we did that, we believe that to get to the highest level, you need to combine that with the humans. So you combine what humans are best at with what tech is best at, and then you go to the high level. Yeah. So we see enormous potential around everything being looked at and say, how much could we actually automate here? And where is it that we need to have the humans interact and bring in the good perspectives they have to get to the highest level of performance? But in short, in the middle, you need to have a very clear strategy and purpose. Then you need to have on the right-hand side the organization with the talent, and you need to have very modern ways of working, is our wording for it. And then you need to combine that with, you could say, very strong technology that both has a platform that provides the data that you need, and then the technology on top to leverage that and provide the digital services that both can help your own team and also can help your clients and partners collaborate with you in your ecosystem. So those are the two elements that you need to bring to play, and that will then enable you to produce all the outcomes that you're looking for, both in terms of having great customer experiences, if you're a consumer company, being able to bring new offers to the table, and then run the company super efficiently. So this is in essence what we are thinking about when we talk about the Bionic company. So this is obviously a bit high level. So let's just dive a bit further in. When we do the research, as I alluded to before, we can also see that if we try to look at how the companies with bionic traits doing compared to the people who are what we could call bionic laggards. And you can see both in terms of earnings, EBITDA, we see higher earnings than the other group. We see that there's a significant higher spend on innovation, which is then translated into value that you see on the right-hand side. So you could say there's a very strong value case because the enterprise value of the bionic companies are significantly higher than the other companies. So this is just to give a bit of a view, like how we can see the correlation between what we saw on the previous page and how these companies are doing when we do the research.
Christian, can I ask you a question?
Yes.
So is there an impact in regards to the hybrid workplace? I mean, you're saying that innovation is super important, but do we actually innovate when we're sitting at home at our laptop and not meeting at the coffee shop or the coffee machine or whatever, you know what I mean? So yeah. What is the innovation rate in regards to the hybrid workplace?
Yeah. Now that's a great question, right? And obviously we have now been through this huge experiment in COVID where a lot of people have been working home and doing things that you wouldn't have believed was possible. And I think it has definitely moved the needle in terms of what is possible to do. I think there's several schools of thought around the innovation topic, like how far can you actually go if you are in the remote format? And I think most people will talk about that you need to combine a bit, as you mentioned, and Sophia, into the hybrid model. So you definitely have activities where you interact in a physical face-to-face fashion. And then there will also be tasks that are very well served to do in more isolation or by yourself. And combining that, you can actually achieve very good results. But I think it's also very dependent on the organization, to be quite honest. I mean, I can certainly say for an organization like ours, I struggle to see us working in a complete remote format forever, right? But for sure, we have been able to do a lot in the remote format, combining it with physical activities, and that actually works super fine. It requires that you really think through your ways of working, and also the whole tooling side needs to be super strong, not to set you back if you move into that format.
Perfect. You got a question from Laura Ivanov in the chat.
Thank you. Yeah, that's a great question. I think I would probably think about it that, if we think about Bionic, there's like a pure North Star of what great looks like if you're super mature. And then I would work my way back and then look at where am I today, actually? What is my point of departure? And what would then be the next level for me to get closer to the Bionic model? Yeah. And that can be various answers for different companies. And I think it's super important not to be overly ambitious and, take 3 steps up if we look at a maturity ladder, but rather make a fairly ambitious goal, but it's not too ambitious that it won't happen, to take steps toward it. I know it's a bit of a consultant answer, but that's a bit the way I would think about it. I don't know if that helped, Laura.
It did. Thanks. I work in Lundbeck, and Lundbeck is an old company, and therefore we have a lot of legacy, as you also mentioned. So starting that conversation about becoming bionic can be a fairly difficult conversation, because when do you see that you have the talent or would start to think in that combination? And also back to the historic timeline you presented in the beginning, where we actually say that a lot of companies are just starting that digital journey in real life. So is this too premature to already now start talking about we need to be bionic in a company like Lundbeck, for example, that is an old company?
Yes. And to be quite frank, we typically serve what I would call the more classic companies, right? In our company, yeah. So we see this challenge all the time, right? So I think what you're calling out here is super important. Like what is the path towards getting to bionic? And of course, you may also scare some people away by starting to talk in the skies, and they say, yeah, Laura, that's fine. Now you've been listening to some crazy consultant, but we are here and we are on planet Earth. So let's just get level set, right? But I think, you could also turn it a bit around. And I say, honestly, our message is actually fairly simple, right? That, we believe that, we don't believe that the AI, for instance, will replace all the humans, right? We actually think, the combination is the where the magic happens, right? And then start to think about, okay, but that sounds cool, but then what is then the next level, right? And then maybe not make it so theoretical, but just like very low practical, like what could that be? And then I think what we see has worked well for organizations. Nobody goes from 0 to fully bionic, right? That's not feasible in any way. Then, of course, you will do some, let's call it piloting, take an area and let's say, okay, where could we try this out and figure out the way that's right for Lundbeck? And this, I think, is actually the key in this, because every company has different culture, different values, different history that has taken you from where you started to where you are. And you are for sure a very successful company today doing what you're doing. And then, of course, the big question is, how can we stay that way and morph into something that will serve us really well in a digital era? And there's not a one size fits all for all organizations. So everything I'm saying here is like more at the general level, and then you need to tailor make that to your situation.
Makes sense. Thank you, Christian.
Absolutely. Let me just hear if there's any other questions or reflections before we push on. All right. See if I can. And this was actually alluding a bit to like, how can you then go about it, right? And this one I'm sure everybody has seen in various formats many times, but it's a good old start small, but have the big perspective and then try to scale it out, either see that it works or it doesn't work, and then you need to course correct. That is the methodology that we've been seeing working best, going from a small team and then starting to scale it out. And this sounds so simple, and this usually doesn't happen as to the story we looked at earlier. And I think it's simply just very important to be very humble and say that if we take Lundbeck or any other classic company, I mean, you've been around for many, many decades, and you're used to doing things in a big way. If we actually want a big value unlock due to digital, and that is in many ways going in different direction than the classic silos that we have built up over the years, then if you really want to have the big impact, it's going to impact a lot of people. And not to sound negatively, but there's a lot of people that have interest in things staying the way they are because they got a job, they need to look after their budgets and their people and their outcomes. And then you have this digital thing that starts to come in working across the whole thing, and is then challenging the way that the company has basically been set up. So I think there's a lot of gravity in organizations at large that will stick to the old way of doing things, and breaking through that and finding a new way that can exist without breaking everything that used to work that you still need. I mean, I think that's the really tricky part. And that's why every step on this way needs to be very carefully handled and managed. Otherwise, it will simply stop, and then we will fall back to the good old way of doing things. Yeah. I think that's a great question, Alan. So as you see here, the question is often digital is anchored out of IT, and how do you pivot out of IT and into business? I think I will even go one level, take one step back and say, I'm very doubtful that IT can actually change the business as a very general point of view. And this is not because I think IT are not good at what they do, but you simply need to have the business side engaged in driving it. At least I have not seen many examples of IT being able to invite their colleagues in the organization to try out new things. And I'm not trying to point fingers here. It's just more what I have seen in my career. And I think the best formula for success here, and certainly the way we would think about it in BCG, is to figure out, what are the opportunities as a business? Like, what is the business value that could be achieved? And who would then be the EVP or the SVP or the whatever on the business side that would be asked then to drive this and look into this? And then, of course, enabled by IT. Does that make any sense, Alan? Or
yeah, it makes good sense. I would say it's a difficult pivot, getting from IT to business and anchoring it at the SVP or EVP level.
Yeah.
If the digitalization is not on their agenda beforehand, yes, it is almost not very often successful to actually anchor it there if it's not there beforehand.
And that's like super tricky, right? Because if you just show up from IT side and say, hey, you should try this. I think the most extreme example we have of this these days is when people need to move to SAP S4, and then IT do the good job of saying, hey guys, we need to move. And then many places the business saying, no way, we have plans for the next 2 years. I mean, go away. I mean, what are you talking about, right? And I can understand both sides of the table, right? It is true that you need to move, and it is true they have plans, right? So how you can turn that conversation around, I mean, that's a great question. And I think that's something that is kind of an enabler if you really want to step in and leverage digital. Because as long as IT or some heroes in the organization are trying to do some things, it probably won't gain a lot of traction and a lot of scale. But I don't have a smart answer for you. I'm very sorry.
It's good enough. Thanks.
Okay, thanks. Okay, let's see if I can. And I think maybe this tells the story I was just trying to tell in a bit of a different story. And in many of these slides, you will see we are talking about algorithms and analytics, because that's a very common area we see these days where people are gaining a lot of value and traction. But it could be any digital area, so don't get too hung up that. But anyways, if we look at advanced analytics, even artificial intelligence, what we say, our way of looking at it is you need to spend 10% of the energy to figure out what are the use cases, what are the algorithms, like what is the great idea that you actually want to go with. And then, of course, you need to sit down and say, okay, great, now I want to do this. What does that mean on the tech side, on the data side? How can I provide the data? I need to feed my algorithms to get the outputs I'm looking for. Now, we would say that's then 20% of the effort. And then 70% of the effort, that is actually what some people in the good old days would call change management. I mean, that is working with the organization, getting comfortable and familiar with this way of working, figuring out how it works in their day-to-day, finding what are the showstoppers, and paving the way for this to actually go from this laboratory into having real impact in the business. And unfortunately, what we see is that, you know, when people are typically doing what I call this thousands flowers bloom, then each of these initiatives sit down, they get cranking on the first 10%, they get into the 20% following after on the tech side, and then they are kind of stopping somehow. And it's a bit like, now we have cracked it, it's here, like why doesn't magic happen? And in our experience, that's because you are lacking the last 70% of the real work, which is the heavy lifting to actually make it become reality. And of course, if you don't do that investment, or you maybe even worse, you had expected that after you did step 2 or everything was fantastic, and then you go home and just wait for a big impact, you're probably going to be disappointed. So let's just take a step back again and get back to the notion of humans and machines, as we call it here. So as said, we don't think that humans should be in any way replaced or made redundant by machines and artificial intelligence. On the contrary, we think that the best outcomes come if we can combine the good traits of human in terms of creative ideation, long-term strategic vision, also on the whole ethical side, what is fine to do and what is not fine to do from an ethical lens. And then, of course, also some lateral knowledge, how we can frame it, and also think about risk without perfect information. And then the whole empathy element, like how can this actually work from the empathic angle? So this is where humans have a unique strength. And then on the right-hand side, we have, of course, called out that tech is great at solving problems at speed and scale, can do the same thing all over. You can program it, it just works, and it can experiment, it can read and figure out the patterns, it can find the rule-based solutions to the problems, and it never forgets anything. So it's actually super complementary. So the trick is, how can we combine this to generate great outcomes? That's really the whole aspiration around the Bionic framework. And just to give you an example to make it come a bit to life. So this is based on work we have done with the global fashion retailer. And the topic or the challenge was, how can we become even better at spotting the next fashion trend? And if any of you know fashion a bit, you will probably know that the ones who get this right, they are sold out. And the ones who get this wrong have a lot of goods in the warehouse they need to sell at the discount at the sale. So huge waste and enormous value if you can just improve your ability to get these trends right with 1 percentage point. So if we start to ask ourselves the question, if we have the humans doing it, and then we ask some AI forecasting model to do the same job of doing the forecasting, then what we see is that AI is winning because it's 25% better in terms of doing this forecasting. If we then say, okay, if we then allow the human just to look at what the AI spits out and then provide corrections to this to the best of their ability to kind of correct it, what we actually see is that deteriorates, that makes the result worse, because AI is actually better at doing that part in itself than the human then subsequently trying to correct it. So that when the human is playing on the tech side of the fence, it doesn't really add value, it destroys value. Yeah. What we see as the best result is if we have the interaction where the human is coming in here. The example is, these are my bets for the top creative styles for the next season. And that's a judgment I do as a human. Yeah. So I enter that into the algorithm, and then the algorithm is doing its work. That's where we get the best result, both in terms of the forecasting, and that then turns into a very significant saving because we are producing more of the right styles. Let me just pause here and say, does this make sense for you guys? Oops, sorry. All right, and then says yes. Super. Let's push on. And then if we look at, what you would want to achieve, again, when we look at the people who get this right, what we see is that, we need to have a super interactive setup. So we have, the interface between human and tech is evolving, and we need to figure out where's the optimal split. How do we do that optimally? And that's something that evolves over time. Then it's super important to get, the empirical learning out of this. So we need to get the feedback into the work so we can experiment and learn. Super important to work cross-functional across areas, across silos even, to get the best of the skills into the mix. And then, of course, we need to be super value-focused, clear sense of purpose in what we are doing. And then, as we talked a bit about the whole, how do you do this in a classical organization, our view is that the people who are able to decentralize, so you actually create a team which has all the competences you need to pull it off. Yeah. So a multidisciplinary team that can do it. And those of you who know about Agile and IT development would recognize a lot of the thinking here. So it's very much saying that you want to have those traits in the ways of working in your Bionic organization, that you are very good at these traits. These traits, many classic companies are not very experienced in, because you have the silos. People have been training their part of the value chain and not working collaborative across. So this is a very new mindset, and being able to have these traits.
Christian, can I ask you a question?
Absolutely.
So you mentioned fashion, the fashion industry, but can you is there an industry or a company that you could emphasize as being best in class?
I could generalize a bit, right? And say that what we see is that the consumer-facing companies, consumer goods and consumer services, are typically further on their journey towards digitalization, and also Bionic companies. An example from the US is Starbucks. They have gone a long way in their way they work with digital marketing, and they push services and offers to their customers, and then they learn on how it's picked up, and they have instilled all of the elements that we are seeing here, and have created very strong results in that whole space, leveraging analytics.
But I also heard a story about Amazon yesterday, that they're actually scaring their customers because they know so much about them. So they're like targeting them with products and services that scares them. So there's also a balance, I guess, on how much of the data you actually can leverage on.
Absolutely. 2 points, right? The digital natives like the Amazons, the Facebooks, and the Googles of this world are absolutely outstanding in every dimension in terms of what we're talking about here, right? They are data-born companies. They fully get it, and they work, along these ways. So yes, they are absolutely embracing it. And to your point, I think, Eric Schmidt used to be the chairman of Google. And he said, our job is to stay just below the creepy line.
Yeah. Good idea. Yeah.
And I think what Amazon probably found out was that they've been too clever using their insights, and then you're sitting there and you don't feel comfortable. Like, how the heck could they know that I exactly wanted episode 3 of that, or that book, or whatever it is, right? So I think that's a bit back to the whole ethical dimension that we talked about, which is a huge topic, especially on the consumer goods side. It's a bit less so on business to business companies. So if you have large industrial companies that are producing goods for other companies, that's a bit of a different dynamic. We also see them being a bit behind on the digitalization curve, and they are now starting to look at what is it that's happening in the consumer space that they can learn from.
Thank you.
Absolutely. So just to talk a bit about what could an organizational look like. So what we're trying to show here, and it's probably easier to work our way up from the bottom. So, I mean, at the bottom, you would definitely base everything off a tech platform with your core data. Those of you who know about IT probably have heard about ERP systems, stuff like that. That's what you find in the bottom, where you have the more transactional information handled and processed. Then what you want to have is on top of that, what we call the Bionic scalable processes, which are kind of the main stuff you're doing as an organization. And that can be both selling, it can be operations, it can be shipping stuff around. It's those kind of base functions that you need across the business to serve your end customers. And I think the big difference in a way is when we then look at what is here called these front-end agile teams. So they are teams that are then sitting down, and their job is to create these large digital opportunities that we have been discussing so far. Yeah. So that would be putting into one of these circles all the skills you need so you can build out whatever you want to do, and you have it in this team. So you don't have to go outside of the team to get the skills you need. So this could be serving people when they need to onboard your company, or it could be how can we make people stay longer or give them more services, offer new things. So that you would need to define for each of these circles. And then you put all the relevant talent into those circles so they have that in the circle. And you will also organize your IT so they are largely able to get the data they need to do and build the digital capabilities and services that they want to bring to either their own organization or to customers and partners. So it's actually very close to a startup mindset. If you think about a small startup that has a new idea, they've gotten to the stage where they have 5 to 10 people. And they basically have everything in that room that they need. It's a bit the same mindset. So we want them to be super agile. They're able to go for where the value is. And they don't really need to ask for help as long as they work within the data that they have agreed should be provided for them. They have the IT capabilities they need, and whatever resources they need, they also have access to. Yeah. So that is a way so we can kind of isolate a bit the people who really are doing the core of the Bionic stuff that we talked about earlier. A lot of that goes on in those circles, and then you can focus on making it a success in a small group there of, let's say, 10, 20 people, and not hundreds or even thousands of people. Yeah. Let me just ask if that makes any sense at all.
It does. I have a question, Christian, and it's not completely related to this slide here, but while you are presenting, I had the reflection that a pharma company like Lundbeck, for example, we have a lot of restrictions in the different markets. Yes. And they vary a lot. So the US has a lot fewer restrictions than Denmark, for example. Yeah. And that also includes when you build an IT system. Yes. Or is trying to digitize towards the user. Yes. And in terms of that, would you start now let's call it the Bionic journey in the market that is the least or the most restricted, and what would be your reflections?
I mean, I guess it's around compliance and
yeah.
and FDA and all these guys. Yeah. I mean, it's a good question, right? And I would say in general, what we see is that industries that are heavily regulated, like pharma, like banking, they are not able to move as quickly as some people who are more or less unregulated, right? So it's a very relevant challenge for yourselves. I haven't thought too much about it. I mean, intuitively, I would say, why don't we start where we have less of regulation or fewer limitations to allow ourselves a larger playing field? So that would be one way of thinking. I think there's also the more underlying question that as the world goes more towards digital, I honestly, this is very much my personal belief, I think that maybe the pendulum in pharma is that we really need to make sure we are absolutely compliant. And I definitely get it, right? Because they can close down your plant, right? Which is not good for you. But I think you need to also in pharma think a bit about how can we be a bit, more opportunistic and think about opportunities and not just, play it ultra safe with Huram or sealer, I would probably say in Danish. Maybe if I have my sealer, it's sufficient, right? So that's at least what I would hope that, the industry could move a bit to allow you not only to go to one area that's less regulated, but the whole of pharma would be able to take a step back and say, let's be a bit more balanced on how we look at the new opportunities compared to the regulatory and the compliance.
Yeah, it makes sense. I guess the scare that we have talked about is if we start in a market that's the least restricted, then do we end up building something that can only be used in that specific market and not create an operating model that can scale to the rest of the world?
That is true. That is true. Which could then lead to the opposite strategy, to go in the most heavily regulated place, right? Because then you can use it all over the place. Yeah. I can see both arguments.
Yeah.
One question, Christian?
Yes, please, Erika.
Yeah. I'm just wondering, do you see that there are any new roles popping up, if you want to go with what you're presenting? Like, 5 years ago, I'm not sure many organizations had maybe a compliance manager, or, security is much more now important in organizations. So there's a security unit and so on. Do you see that organizations should start thinking about new roles that, they should think hiring in order to use this new technology and so on?
Absolutely. I mean, I think both on the tech side, there's a whole shift on tech going from what used to be called on-premise, that you had stuff in your data center, to these days you have it in the cloud. And that's literally a total transformation on how you work with tech and IT. But I also see it on the, let's call it business side, right? When you want to have Scrum Masters that can help you work in agile ways, you want to have product managers that understand what is the product that we are working on. And you want to have the people, as you said, compliance. You also have then cyber. I mean, you have a suite of roles that we didn't see 5-10 years ago. And the issue is that it's not only you. So it's like everybody who's starting to look for these people. So I think you probably need to also think about how can we possibly source that amount of talent. I mean, certainly we have a client even here in Nordics, who says we need to significantly ramp up on the tech side. We need like 1,000 engineers, like software engineers, right? And now the whole world is screaming for software engineers. And if you look at data science, it's the same thing, right? So, and you can't just go and hire all those people. So then you need to figure out, how will I go about it? Can I upskill my own team? So I think, one of the absolute largest challenges in going towards a bionic model is that you will need new skills and competences compared to your classic world. And how can you get that? And how can you balance keeping all the good skills that you still need, and then bringing in the new and upskilling a lot of the people who are in the organization to get the new skill sets? And that's a huge, huge challenge.
So previously I didn't see so much a data architect, and there are like new roles popping up where existing roles are being split because it's
Yes.
so huge that
Yes.
one person can't handle everything. So do you see like an AI architect, like a specific role about that? Have you seen organization where you thought, I hadn't seen that role before, interesting?
Yeah, I mean, we see many of our clients that build entire data and analytics teams. 50 people, right?
Yeah. Okay.
Type thing.
So right. Yeah. Okay. I
mean,
got that
now
one.
It depends on the size, right? But
yeah.
I mean, absolutely is the short answer.
Okay. Great. Okay. Thanks.
Let me just see, did we have any other? Okay, this is just an example of a company we have worked with. So the way they did it was to, as I said, push down, the big building blocks in the bottom, which are common elements that everybody needs. And then you have the teams that is sitting on top. They chose to organize it along the key customer journeys. So you see the first box is like, how do we get customers in the door and get them onboarded and set up? And then in the next box, we have everything about serving you while you are here. And then, of course, the last one is around how we can help you navigate in the whole ecosystem that we're participating in. So this is the way they chose to do it. And then they have in each of these green boxes, they have the, let's call it Bionic teams that have all the skills and the tools and the capabilities they need to build out and do whatever they want to do. And that is then provided by the lower layers in the stack or in the organization. Let me just put a few words on tech. I have said that then you have the data that you need and everything is great. Most clients that we work with absolutely have a legacy IT landscape, what we have tried to show on the left-hand side. Tons of integrations, various versions of the same data, so there's no single source of truth. And there's data you need that's not even there. Everything is pretty old, and it's absolutely not fit for purpose in a digital era. So what we are just calling out here is that what you need to do, as we talked about on the organizational side of the house, you need to figure out what is the journey towards Bionic. It's actually exactly the same on the tech side. Now, our firm view is that what you shouldn't do is to say, now we need to get from the left-hand side to the right-hand side, so we will make a huge mega transformation of our IT, invest in everything being brand new stuff, because there's a very high likelihood that that program will not succeed. And if it succeeds, it will not be able to do what you need it to do. So also this, we believe, should be done in a very agile way. You should have a rough picture of where you want to end up, which is depicted as the right-hand side. And then you need to think about what are the first things we need to be able to enable from the IT side. So if we have one of these Bionic teams, they have specific data they need in order to do what they have to do on analytics or digital services. Then let's provide that and figure out how we do that. And when we then see that it actually works, then we can start to build it out and do it in a more proper way. And then form a journey that will take us from the left-hand side to the right-hand side. This can be journeys over several years, right? But the key is not to just have a big black box where you do it for some years and then you say, ta-da, here it is. But you do it in a way so you deliver data capabilities as you go, so you can feed it into the teams that need it, and they can then deliver value. Because this is only going to work if you can show value along the journey. It will never work if you need to wait 12 months, 18 months before you have the first result, right? You need to have something super quick that can show here is something that works. We could prove it. In this situation, we achieved this. It makes sense. So let's invest in building this out. Then we have the value proof, and then we can build it out. And you need to support that from the IT side. So this is more for the IT audience, but for all of you, the message is you should actually do this in a way so it goes hand in hand with your journey on the business side, and you along that journey, provide the data and the functionality that is needed to execute on the digital use cases that you identify as you go through. So I see there's a couple of questions here. What is the difference between DevOps teams and Bionic teams? Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, DevOps is definitely the usual way of working when we look on the tech side. So for the tech team, they would be a DevOps team or even DevSecOps team, and they are then part of the Bionic team. Yeah, so they are the ones who can build out the digital product, but there will also be product owners, business people, analytic people. So there will be other competences as well. Did that answer the question, Alan?
Yes, it did. I see them very similar, those two. You can say it's kind of an extended team than DevOps teams with,
exactly,
into Bionic teams. So maybe a small evolution, but
like it.
Yeah. No, I actually also have a different question to the slide that you're on. The data layer that you're speaking about is something that we're concerned, or we're dealing a lot with. But where should the funding or who should pay for that data layer? Is that coming from an IT side or coming from a business side? It's also, a bit back to who's the anchor point here.
Yeah, exactly.
Because it's not, if it's omni-channel, then it's not one silo that's actually involved in digesting or ingesting the information. It's the company, right?
Yes. That's a great question. I mean, I think there's a lot to be said around an integrated business case. And with that, I mean that you will engage on the business side of the house to understand, so let's do this omni-channel thing. That's awesome. What can you actually then achieve? What is the value you can deliver, right? If you had this platform. And then we can say on the IT side, in order to enable what you want to do, we need to build out this data layer, and that's going to have a cost. That is technically speaking only an enabler. The data layer in itself won't deliver value to the business. That's just a cost, right? So in an ideal world, we combine those two elements. So we have the value side and the cost side in one business case, and that the board will have a look at and say, is this something we want to do?
I think from my perspective, it's usually these things not die, but seldomly goes to the board for decisions. Usually something that's coming from a business unit or someone that's sitting at the receiving end, having some issues and needed access to data, but that data is spread across multiple legacy systems with super spread out infrastructure and no transition layer, and like the full stack is old school, right?
Yes.
And I see it difficult to kind of make what you suggest a common business case for company-wide decisions.
Yeah.
But I see it at least seldomly decisions being done like this.
Yeah. And I think it's probably also because we are not used to thinking about IT and data in this way, right?
Mm.
I mean, like I guess you could, now I don't know what industry you're in, Alan, but I mean, like if you're a production company, I'm sure they wouldn't just build a new factory without talking about it in the board.
Probably not, but would they be talking about IoT enablement? Right, that should be the right question, because that's data which they will most likely end up selling side or in next to the actual physical products.
Yes. So that's a great conversation, right? So I think, I mean, it's of course depending on the level of maturity. And I know my school book answer is very consultant-like, and yeah, Christian, that sounds nice, but this is the real world, right? And I guess, if you're before that, and of course many organizations are, then I think what I would suggest is to try to somehow combine the data side, the investment on the data side, with what is the value. And of course, you can then go, if IT reports to the CFO and say, hey, we have this request to support this area with data. This we can do. They say they can achieve this, that, and the other. Can we get the funding for that? I mean, I guess that's the alternative.
Yeah. So building the business case based on the potential outcomes.
Yeah.
Sure.
I think, I mean, if I was the CIO, I would probably try to think of a way that I could get that conversation into the boardroom, right? I mean, and I'm not saying it's easy, because you probably need to do some evangelizing and find some people who have seen the light, and then, you know, but it's, I guess my point is only, the reason I'm being a bit annoying here is, I think unless organizations start to realize that digitalization is happening in the world, and they should actually also relate to it, so it's not just an analog world anymore.
I completely agree, Christian. What I'm seeing is just, you know, people are still stuck trying to move into Office 365 or something, you could say basic, right?
Yeah.
We're not even at a stage where you can start discussing digitization of your data layers and transformation layers and stuff like that. We're still struggling with just signing on to Teams.
Yes. But that's totally fair, Alan. And I think a bit repeating myself, I mean, we need to start, you know, at the point of departure, right? You can't go from Stone Ages to digital native tomorrow. So.
Sorry to interrupt you guys, but we have 2 minutes left.
Super. So I think the good news is, from my side at least, that I only have a few slides left. So I think, I mean, the way we look at it, you know, if you believe that the processes will be automated and powered by AI, that we need agile teams combining humans and tech, and then data is the new source of competitive advantage, which I'm positively very much personally my view, and that tech stacks need to be able to be modular and innovative. I mean, if you believe all of that, I think you're looking into a bionic future. And this is kind of our view of the winners of tomorrow. And then I think the trick is to figure out what is my starting point and what would be the next step, a bit to your point, Alan, and also Laura, the conversation we had on Lundbeck, right? So just want to leave you with this. We truly believe the winning answer is human plus technology.
Thank you so much, Christian. And Ellen, you have a final question. Can you make it short, please?
No, I'm just clapping.
Oh, you're clapping. Oh, fantastic. I think we all should clap at Christian, and thank you so much for your engagement this morning. I noted a few things. Be pragmatic, take it step by step towards being bionic, and at last think big, start small, and grow fast. So I think wherever you are in your industry or maturity, then there's hope towards being and transforming into a bionic company. Thank you, Christian. And you will all get the presentation, and of course you are welcome to contact Christian afterwards if you have other specific questions. Just a little marketing to end with. This is a part of the Inspirational Talks, and we have the next one March 9th at 9 o'clock as well. And it will be with Imran Rashid talking about feelability. So that's his new book on how we lost touch with life and how we will get it back. So I think you should definitely put a big cross in your calendar on March 9th. But otherwise, I would like to say thank you so much, everyone, and have a wonderful day. Hopefully it won't rain anymore. And thank you again, Christian.
Thank you. Great meeting you all. Have a nice day.
Thank you.
Ciao. Bye-bye. Bye.